I want to go ahead and turn it over to you, Tony, if we could have each of the presenters just sort of briefly walk us through your backgrounds and get started that way.
Yes, hello everybody. My name's Tony Smith. I'm a former Director General of the UK Border Force. I worked in the UK Home Office for 40 years, man and boy in all aspects of immigration and border control. I suppose the main highlights of my career, I was Director of Ports of Entry in Canada when 9/11 happened. I was Director of Ports of Entry in the UK when 7/7 happened, which was the attacks on our London metro system. And so they put me in charge of the London 2012 Olympic border security on the grounds that lightning could not strike 3 times on one person. And I was goal commander for the London 2012 Olympics, which went well. I'm now managing director of Fortinus Global Limited, which is a global border management consulting company, and I'm also chairman of the International Border Management and Technologies Association. Thank you.
Perfect. Michael, you want to go next?
Yeah, good morning. It's hard to follow up from that. So Michael Avanenko, I've had a 24-year career, national and homeland security. For me, 9/11, like so many others, had such an impact on my life. For me, it was very personal. Lost a dear family friend during that time, John Scala, New York, New Jersey Port Authority cop. So while I was in the Bush administration in those early years, once the department was created, I left the opportunity to serve the mission, and to honor his legacy. So over a period of 19 years, I held several different positions, tackled many different issues, counterterrorism, counter-narcotics, counter-proliferation, liaison to the intel community, managed several different teams to sit side by side with operators to counter transnational criminal organizations. And then for the better part of the last 7.5 years after leaving a year ago, I managed CBP's commercial open source capabilities. So we were a one-stop shop, handled all the requirements, the testing of new technologies, identifying novel capabilities out there in the space, privacy policy, procurement, and then once we actually procured, then we did everything that we needed to do to deploy it out to operators and analysts across the enterprise. So happy to be here today and look forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. And Declan?
Wow, both extremely difficult acts to follow, so I won't even try. So I am the juxtaposed technologist in this panel. 19 years ago, I graduated with a theoretical physics degree, and I didn't know what to do with that. So I became a technologist, and I consulted on various projects around defense, security, and intelligence, working directly with agencies, and also on large enterprise software projects as well. I consulted for a long time around structured data analytics, around telecommunications, around the capture and analysis of that. And the last 10 years, really my focus has been AI and natural language processing. So taking unstructured data and finding insights and actionable intelligence from that, applying that to both public sector and private sector clients, leveraging data in creative ways, solving thorny problems that otherwise you couldn't solve without leveraging large amounts of technology. My interest in the border comes from a project I got involved in about 7 years ago, working with the Home Office in the UK, which has become a highly successful biographic screening implementation that we've done with the Rosette software. That's where I first met Tony, but I'm very happy to be included in this group today and look forward to the conversation we're going to have.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So, Tony, wonder if you could set the stage for us when it comes to the key principles of border management to get us going here.
Yeah, sure. So as I say, I've been in border management for an awfully long time, a great many years now. And, sort of more recently working in different countries on border strategies. And what you'll find wherever you go is there are some common threads. I think the first one is, what is the border for? What's the vision statement? Most strategies start off with that. And it is really about facilitation. and moving people and goods across your border for economic growth. And the easier that process is, then the better it is for your country and your economy. But of course, the sidebar to that is that you want to make sure that those movements are compliant and that you prevent the movement of people and goods that may be harmful to your community. So that's a pretty common thread. And I think underpinning that, there are sort of three fundamental principles that border geeks like me espouse. The first one is called pushing the border out, which is now possible with technology. In other words, can we check people? Can we check passports? Can we check goods before people and goods actually arrive at your physical frontier? The answer is yes, we can. So how good are you at that, at pre-screening people so they can't cause any damage because they can't even get to your country in the first place? The second thing is this thing that I'm going to talk about a bit more here is integrated border management. That kind of sprung out of 9/11 in the States, where, if you read the 9/11 report, a number of points of failure were the fact that data was being held by different siloed departments, federal departments that weren't sharing that data with the border. And as a result of that, a huge amount of work went in the US to integrating customs and immigration into the Customs and Border Protection team that we see now, but also integrating systems. And that's gone on. We've seen that in Canada, in Australia, here in the UK, and even most recently, we were in South Africa quite recently, where they've done a similar project. Because what you really want to do is make sure that all the entities and agencies, there's quite a lot of them, that have got an interest in your border and risk assessing what's coming across there are working together and sharing intelligence and information to maximize the chances of a successful integration. And the final part of that, of course, is the growth of biometric technology and the capability now to identify people other than by name, and also, with barcodes on goods and so on, and electronics, much easier now to keep that identification flow from first point of encounter right the way through the system to the border and beyond. So those are the three main principles, and I think the main one that would interest this audience would be these principles of integrated border management. Thank you.
Yeah. So Declan, do you have something you were going to weigh in on?
So I think it's great that we have Tony here to set the stage and give us an overview of what it really takes to effectively manage a border. Yeah, very much a number of key points brought out there. My mind immediately looks at this idea that you have a finite amount of resources to manage a border. You've got a finite amount of people and agents and technology. And what you want to do is make sure you facilitate the majority of people to travel with as little interruptions as possible, and that you can focus the resource that you have on those that are the suspect, risk assessed worst offenders, and make sure that you apprehend those. So really, my view is that, well, what we want to do is ensure that the technology is aligned with that goal. And I want to explore with my colleagues today, how we can realize that, leveraging some of their absolutely special domain knowledge, and think about, okay, how does it look? How does it look when we look to the future, or how does it look in terms of best practice for applying technology and hopefully AI at the border in the future?
Sure. Yeah. And Michael, want to get your
yeah. So when Tony mentioned that first principle of kind of pushing back the borders, I was brought back to the early days of CBP under Commissioner Bonner and the programs that he put into effect, in addition to all the different threats that we were seeing during those times. So if you remember 2001, Richard Reed and the shoe bombing, right? That's why you got to take your shoes off at the airport. The 2006 liquid explosives plot from Heathrow, Al-Qaeda trying to blow up transatlantic flights. The 2009 Christmas Day bomber Abdul Muttalib for going into Detroit. So all that means is, how do we get data before and prevent bad actors no longer have to worry about them during like 9/11 and the 20th hijacker at the physical border, but actually pushing that out. So CBP under his leadership, you look at the 24-hour rule where cargo manifest, any cargo bound for the US, you have to send that information in. You have the advanced passenger information, passenger name record, And then the series of, the programs themselves, where CBP officers are stationed abroad. Container Security Initiative, you got the Immigration Advisory Program, where they sit side by side with immigration folks to look at potential risk. And then the idea of partnership, right? And I think this is a theme that goes through not only the government, but the commercial, and how those two worlds come together, where customs trade partnership against terrorism, you work with CBP, you provide information, you seek benefits, whether that's in the, most people today, there's global entry, TSA has pre-check, things like that. You voluntarily give your information up to receive that benefit. So all of that is evolving with the technology, with the AI, with the biometrics, and making that, a force multiplier across, various areas and domains.
That's well said. Thanks for setting the stage like that. So, Tony, I want to come back to a point that you made in one of the principles. Can you expound a bit more on this concept of an integrated border management and kind of tell us what that really means in practice?
Yeah, so I don't want to give people the impression that what you need to do is merge, your agencies at the border into a single uniform. You don't actually need to do that. Many countries have done that, as I said, but it's much more about how well you share data across your government agencies, how much collaboration is going on between the government agencies. We counted something like 27 different departments and agencies at national level in the UK alone that have all got an interest in crossing the border. So when I was head of the border force, of course, I had 27 different departments coming at me, asking me to do things with what Declan described as finite resources. So the idea really is to try to find a way of, if you like, integrating those systems so that the single entity that you have got on the front line, whoever that may be, whether that's a police officer, customs officer, or a police officer, immigration officer, whatever, has a system that is reliant, at least insofar as he can be, and is going to enable him or her to conduct an effective risk assessment. That hasn't always been the case, and many countries have learned and still are learning in North America and across Europe about the dangers of not doing this. And it did form the fundamental principles that I adopted when I was risk assessing people coming to the London 2012 Olympics, because there was a vast majority of people coming on were genuine people wanting to come and see a fantastic sporting event, but we knew we were under a severe threat level, that there were people who would like to cause us harm. And this was a bit of a nightmare for me, really, in thinking, well, how do I know I've got all the bases covered? I had to speak to lots and lots of departments across Whitehall, across the UK, and even beyond, with you guys and the Border 5 and others, to see how I could mitigate those risks. And that's really what integrated border management means. It means, can we work together, across our governments, be they local or national, federal, and also perhaps with other countries to give us the best chance of mitigating threats. And so when people tell me they've got the best border in the world, these are the sorts of exam questions that I will be asking them, and before I come to a conclusion on whether or not they are. Thanks.
Perfect. Well said. And so now that we've got this foundation, Michael, I want to come back over to you and can you provide some insight into some of the current challenges around the data and the technology facing border officials today?
I mean, if you look at it, it's a daunting task, right? And you think about the level of volume of whether people or goods coming in, right? You have to fuse all this information together, various different formats, right? We got watch lists, different agencies putting together, air, maritime, et cetera, land. And so it is a challenge. For me, when you look at it at its most basic level, it's how do you take all that information, provide it in such a way that allows the frontline officer to make the most informed decision that he can in an efficient way, given the need to, there will always be pressure to move faster, more quicker, hey, sometimes you have seconds literally to move this stuff around. CBP, for the better part, I would say the last 20, 30, CBP's system, automated targeting system, better known as ATS, is the risk assessment system. There's been enhancements, but I would say over the last, say, 10, 15 years, huge investments from going from the old school, rows and columns to now actually bringing it to the cloud, making it available to apply some of these new and novel capabilities for AI, et cetera. Some organizations, agencies, governments haven't been fortunate enough to move that for various reasons, but it's pretty amazing the amount of effort and the again, applying those resources in such a way to be able to handle this workload.
Michael, I'll just jump in there. So I think that
please.
when you talk about CBP and when Tony references the UK, I think both our situations are similar in that we are bound to a degree by the existing legacy systems and the iterations on those systems that have happened over time. And sometimes that stops us from being as agile as maybe we want to be in terms of change, to the point where maybe some of the more developing countries that Tony works with and consults on can almost skip to the end, right, and implement best practice before maybe we could. But I am aware that CBP obviously take great strides into implementing technology and being first with that, and that's very admirable. I think the case for making an integrated border where you have existing legacy systems is something that we can tackle now. 10 years ago, I'd have been talking about the challenges of the huge amounts of data, right? The big data problem, where you've got the 4 V's of data: the volume, the veracity, the variety, and the velocity of data, right? We talk about those buzzwords. I think now those things have been almost solved, right, by technology and hardware. We're almost in that post big data time, and now it's about how do we leverage that data in this integrated border system, and what's the role of AI? Could there be large models that exist from previous years of decision making that border guards have made, for example? And that's the questions that we want to ask of the data. It kind of falls on you, Michael and Tony, to at least understand and reference the pain points, so that the technologists can get on with finding novel solutions for that.
Yeah, so let's stay right there, Declan, for a moment. Talk us through what are some of the ways AI can help border agencies and specialists to this end.
Well, at the moment, we want to get this best possible risk assessment, right? We want to, I think, this notion of a force multiplier for the agents on the ground is where we're at with that. So how can we get the most up-to-date risk assessment information in front of that person that's got 60 seconds to review a passport and take some fingerprints and take a photo and ultimately make a decision whether they pull somebody to the side or not? So that's where I see the opportunity for augmentation. So there is a lot that we can do with data in terms of understanding. A biometric match is something that's going to be 100% right or not, right? It's a biometric match is something that we rely on, and in the background now there's a lot of AI that applies in that. A risk can be assessed quite quickly if you have good biometrics, but in the absence of that, you want to maybe pull together things like publicly available information. You want to get a watch list that can be updated as quickly as possible with as much accuracy as possible. The border guard wants to know everything they can about a person before that person's in front of them, and that's where we're going to start to focus. Some emerging technology that we're on the cusp of a revolution in terms of AI. It's something that we'll always want to talk about at Babel Stream.
Yeah, I mean, what you're really talking about here is using AI to enable the future state of borders and border officers. So, Tony, I'm going to come back over to you. Can you walk us through what that future state might look like in practice?
Yeah, well, I think it's worth just thinking about how the border officer has developed, the role of the border officer has developed over the years. with the advent of technology. When I first worked on the border many moons ago, we didn't have any technology. It was all about paper-based documents, passports, landing cards, customs declarations, and talking to everybody. But of course, now we've got massive movements, haven't we, of people and goods across international borders. I mean, that model just doesn't hold up anymore. We can't really do that. And nor would we want to, really, because we know that 99% of goods and people crossing borders are perfectly compliant anyway. So this has given birth to something which I know as intelligence-led border controls. And intelligence is really just refined data. So it is about the data, as Declan describes. It is important to get accurate and timely data. That's not always the case. But if you are getting accurate and timely data and you have systems in place that can analyze that data and transform that into something we call actionable intelligence, it enables you to issue an alert to your officers at the front line, whether they're in on passport control or in customs, to say, there is a threat here, or there's a likely risk here, and this is the sort of intervention that you ought to be making. So I think that as this artificial intelligence, Declan knows far more about this than I will ever learn about this constant emergence of AI and technology. I still think that we need to keep our eye on the fact of what will border officers be doing. I still think we'll have border officers. I don't think they're going to go away. I don't think they're going to be replaced by robots. I mean, some people do. I don't think that. I think you still need good people to stop bad people and bad stuff, really. But it's how you use these tools. And can we find a way of translating the tools and the technology that Declan describes into a language that officers at the border and their leaders can understand? That's always been a challenge for me, is I quite often ran into providers of technology in my time in government, but they couldn't always explain to me how this new gizmo that they developed would actually help me in my mission of, which I describe at the top of this, about, making sure that, we facilitate the genuine and stop the harmful. It was more about the tool rather than the application of the tool. So that's what really interests me, I suppose. But I do think that there's a lot in this. And I do think that most of the advanced countries now are very well versed in the art of the possible and are still learning about the art of the possible in terms of technology. Thank you.
Yeah, Declan, did you want to weigh in on that one?
I just started talking before I'd unmuted my microphone.
Yeah.
But Tony, how does it look from a practical point of view? So I like the idea that can I walk into an airport and it be completely frictionless? Because I can imagine a world where technology can make that happen if the risk assessment is done, even for an ad hoc traveller who's appearing at a border without submitting a visa application or without making a declaration that they were going to cross the border. Is there something that we could do? I think that the data can be collected as somebody travels, as somebody moves towards a port of entry, as they move towards a land border. We can look at their car, we can cross-reference that with publicly available information, understand, are they on a watch list? And if, in the example where, the 99.99% of people that are innocent, I'd like the idea that we could facilitate them to cross a border without them having to even see another person before they get onto their plane or before they get onto their train or their boat. At the moment, I don't see that's the state of things, right? I know that we have to do various checks at the moment. I know we have to put down our passport and have the MRZ analyzed and have it cross-checked, and there might be something on a list that maybe matches. But and there's notable failures where that's not worked out, right? Where people have been on watch lists and they haven't been picked up, even when they've stood in front of a border guard. So the example that we talk about is with the CBP and the Boston Marathon bombers. That was a big change that pushed them to change the technology they used for name screening when it happened, because it came out to be a linguistic error in their analysis of a person's name that enabled them to enter the country. Known terrorists and activists, the Masano brothers in that instance. So there are. It's obviously that there is potential for failure if you rely on single point solutions in in the border crossing. But I still think that the vision might be seamless crossing. Is that something that's amenable to border agents? Is that the vision that they want to work to? Because as a technologist, I want to know what that vision is so that we can start to think about what the technology is going to be that's going to be positioned there. So I'll talk for a little extra there, but yeah, Tony and Michael, I want to know what your vision of the future looks like. Yeah.
So for me, again, the major thing is empowering operators and analysts for tactical exploitation. And how do we use this technology to empower them, right? Most border guards are law enforcement. They're not trained formal analysts, right? And so asking them to do what, intel community with lines and rows of analysts who are, either an inch deep and a mile wide, or, 2 miles wide and 2 miles deep, right? And so being able to say, hey, in relation to seizures, right? So you have a border seizure that goes on, 500 pounds of cocaine, et cetera. Now you get to sit back and go, okay, now give me all seizures at my port for the last 5 years. Now go to all of our field office for the last 5 years. Now give me the whole southern border, and you're able to delve down and slice and dice data. And then, the kind of promising, ways of, the GPT and LLM capabilities. How do I simplify that process to be digestible and allow them to take action on it? And Tony, I know that's a major theme of yours. I dealt with that in open source, the commercial capabilities. There's a lot of AI already in use in that space. And you got optical character recognition, you got image detection, named entity recognition, right? So there's all these things that are being provided for different aspects of the mission set. So very interesting times for sure.
Tony, what's your view of the border of the future? Is my idea that it could be seamless, is that something that...
So potentially it could, Declan, in some scenarios. It starts and ends really with the geopolitical environment of the country you're talking about, and what the risks are and what the frameworks are. Of course, universally, it's much easier for air mode to do what you suggest, because most advanced countries now get something called API, Advanced Passenger Information, from the airlines before the flight takes off. And if you're satisfied that's accurate and that person is properly qualified to cross your border, then I suppose all you really need to do when they land, if your airport's appropriately configured, is to establish that is still the same person and they've not sort of swapped identities along the way. So I think you are seeing increasingly, an advent of systems, not fully developed yet, but systems where, e-gates and kiosks are gradually, slowly being, people are trying to replicate those with some kind of a walkthrough option to relieve queues, really. So I think that's possible in air. It's much more difficult in other modes of arrival, particularly at land borders, where you don't necessarily get advanced data on what's coming at you, whether that's people or goods. There are ways of doing that, but that means you've got to change your policy and introduce things like authorized economic operator schemes or trusted traveler schemes, so that people will be given an opportunity, if they wish to submit the data relating to the people in their car, the goods in their vehicle, the vehicle itself ahead of time. Then there are technologies at some land borders, including US, where that data is used to provide a much faster traveler experience. But I'm a little bit nervous of moving completely towards seamless travel. I think most of us would still like to see an officer in and around the place, properly equipped with the right tools to enable him or her to intervene at every opportunity, because we must not underestimate the opposition. There are still very, very well-resourced people out there on the other side of the law that are also developing systems and processes in order to defeat us. And when we are defeated, we all know what happens. There is a huge inquiry. asking us why we didn't stop this event from happening. So there is a natural and I think justifiable risk aversion amongst our border officers to be a little bit careful in not being too flamboyant about adopting some of these principles, even though there's this most fantastic technology out there. I think it's going to be a gradual process of evolution, but it is important, I think, really important that government and industry work very, very closely together so that they're up to speed, with one another on what is the art of the possible and what is the current risk environment, which of course changes all the time. Thanks.
Yep, Tony, I like that idea of, the art of the possible isn't necessarily the best thing for the for the border guards, for the travellers. It's something that I'm interested in exploring, though, right? And spoken to Michael previously, the idea of using more tools for risk assessment, and I think we alluded to it a little a minute ago. The idea that a border guard, an intelligence analyst, does it become a crossover between those two? And then what are the activities that person actually does? So yes, they're present, but now is their activity something that they spend time revising watch lists, or do they spend their time doing directed search on open source intelligence platforms to check the person that they have in front of them? Or is that a process that becomes industrialized behind the scenes, and all they have to work with is the red flag, green flag that the system tells them? So it's varying degrees of it. I could get full Big Brother about how I think we should really use the data, but that might not necessarily be the best approach for everyone.
Perfect. So what are some of the other key factors that border agencies should consider when selecting and implementing AI technology? I want to go back over to you, Tony, for this one.
Okay, so one of the dangers with the way we do things is an almost slavish reliance on watch lists. And I think if you do cross borders regularly, you will quite often see officers looking at their computer rather than looking at you. And that does make me a little bit nervous, because that really assumes that you have a very comprehensive system underpinning your watch list, which you won't necessarily have. So when I did the Olympics, I knew that a number of agencies in the UK had watch lists of their own, data sources of their own that they hadn't put on my watch list, but that if someone came through my border and did something awful, I would get the blame. So we devised a system where we were able to capture the source data from for accreditation applications and send that to a number of different locations. So that covered off the privacy, data sharing issues. They didn't have to tell me what they knew about this person. They just had to put up a red flag, and then the next day there would be a conversation which might lead to an escalation and so on, right up to ministers to decide, well, actually, this person might be a terrorist threat, even though he's not on the border watch list, he's on somebody else's radar. And that goes for international as well, through the Five Eyes, and where we have data sharing agreements with our international friends and partners. So I think we need to be aware of the fact that there is always going to be information available out there that might not necessarily be on your computer. And so my mission will be, well, how do I going back to intelligence-led controls, who is going to help me get as much of that intelligence as I can translated and into a place where my officers might be able to find it. And just another quick case study, when we were doing the Olympics, we found somebody who was coaching one of the African female cycling teams, who was perfectly clear as far as we were concerned. Nothing came up anywhere on any of our systems. But he did come up on the US Megan's Law system, which was an open source system that became legal around that time in the States, where we were able to run things against open source. And I mean, that would have been a huge embarrassment to me if I'd have authorized that person to enter as a coach to a female cycling team when he was a convicted paedophile. That wouldn't have been something I would have known. So I think these case studies really bring this to life, don't they? That you're really constantly looking for support mechanisms that are legal, that have to be lawful and proportionate, but give you the best chance of intervening at that early point and nipping problems like that in the bud. Thanks.
Michael, I'll come over to you for this one too.
Yeah, so you touched on some interesting things, the real life application of using publicly available information and what are the balance as it relates to PAI and commercially available information, and first, here in the US, First and Fourth Amendment, civil rights, civil liberties, etc. And so I think there will always be tension there. I believe it's healthy, right? And the debate about which information, which technology should be applied in different ways. But I think what kind of Tony alluded to, and where probably I'm going to get in trouble, lean more towards, right? For me, you're going to be damned if you do, damned if you don't. There is the ubiquitous nature of the volume of data that's available as more and more people spend time in the virtual world than just regular. And then, for me, during my time and my experience with CVP is we took it very seriously, right? And knowing that we would partner with our Office of Privacy, the legal folks, working side by side to work through whatever it is, create the policies in place, make sure whether it's a PTA for privacy and PIAs and other mechanisms to utilize the information. That is extremely important, because again, you obviously want to have the public's trust, and you don't want to get into a situation where you're like, okay, you caught me, and then you degrade everybody's ability across the board. So for me, I appreciate the debate. I look forward to robust discussions as it relates to it. But understand, as an agency who has a mission set to protect the country, there is available information that we know should be utilized. You look at 2015 Paris attacks, right, where they were online, Facebook and others. The Saudi student who was talking online, right? So these are all the things that are going to have to be balanced, and then figure out a way to best apply it across multiple mission sets.
It makes perfect sense. Oh, sorry, Declan, go ahead.
Sure. I think what I'm hearing is that technology isn't the sole answer, right? It's not just technology on its own that's there to make a difference. It has to be in combination with policy, in consideration of human rights, and it's got to be aligned with the mission. I think that's kind of what from both Tony and Michael, that's what I get from this this section. I think also that we're at the cusp of like a revolution in terms of technology, and I think that the policy and the mission and the understanding of rights is going to have to almost catch up with what's gonna change very, very soon. So I think having a full and clear understanding of the problem space and the vision of where we want to go in the future will help all of those things kind of stay aligned, going forward into the future. It's an exciting area to be in. I think that obviously borders are headline making, and they're something that we all have to experience from time to time as well. So it's not something that's going to go away, but it's definitely something that needs to keep up, on the non-tech side as well.
So before we get to the questions, I just want to kind of go through really quick, and what advice would each of you give to border professionals who want to integrate AI into their operations? And Tony, why don't we start back over with you here?
Well, I think the first thing is to learn about the technology that's available and to embrace conversations with companies that have this technology on a non-commercial basis. And quite often, these relationships get very, very difficult because quite often salesmen are trying to sell something, and the buyers in the government haven't really got the inclination or the money to buy it. But I do think that that's one of the reasons we set up IBMATA, was really to promote a non-commercial conversation between border agencies and technology providers, and also, with the ports and the industry and the users as well, because that's a really. So I would encourage border leaders, border agents to get out more and to see what's out there and to have an open mind when it comes to AI. And in reverse, I quite like to challenge some of the technology providers to think a little bit more about the types of products that they're developing and their relevance, because I have worked with a number of companies who have been developing things before I got there. And, when I got there, I said, well, you've wasted an awful lot of money on something that's no good, really. It's not going to really help the border officer at all. It might be a good product, but it's not going to help the border officer. So for me, it's all about communication, really, Kevin. It's about, how good are the communication platforms? And I really like these kind of conversations. I spend a lot of time on these kind of calls, and also, chairing conferences around the world, which still gives me a buzz, because I always learn something new myself. And I think technology is developing at such a rapid pace that it's really incumbent upon all of us to try and keep abreast of developments. Thank you.
Michael?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Tony more. I was jotting down some notes that I had during this, and for me, the partnerships between the government and industry, like one of the key parts that always frustrated me, and Tony, I think you kind of alluded to it, where they come to me in what I would term shiny penny. We have the best technology ever, you must buy this now, but you have no understanding about what my requirements are, what I deal with, and how it could be applied. And so for those on the industry side, do a little bit of homework, figure out what that is, and you will have a much better introduction to very busy government people who will listen a little bit further than just saying, yeah, I'll listen to your spiel. And then, education, I think, is key, right? The fast pace of technology and what's going on today. I'm not a technologist. I can play one on TV sometimes. Like you look at AI and all what is an LLM and all the neural networks and all the fun that comes with it, Declan, stuff you can talk about in your sleep. I really do believe that education, so understanding how to inform, and then for me, finally, it's for companies who go in and do business with the government, understanding that there's a lot of baggage that comes with it. It's just not a handoff, fire and forget, etc. So a lot of this policy, the privacy, if you're cutting edge, there's risk involved, and so you need to help the government provide some information, provide avenues by which that information then, deal with the many aspects. It's just not technology, it's just not data. There's a whole lot of things that come along with it, based upon my years of managing of this. So again, I thank you for the time and opportunity to be here today.
Yeah, of course. Declan, anything else to add in there?
I like where Michael and Antonio are going with that. I see what would help really when border professionals are looking to integrate AI is a closer collaboration with people out there that are developing technology. So it's not developing things in silos. It's it's working with organizations like IBMATA that Tony chairs, and yeah, it's getting closer to people that have been in the field. Michael has been up close and personal with the existing systems, legacy systems that have changed over time. That knowledge is absolutely key for people that are going to be developing new technologies using AI. And I love the idea that there could be a model, a risk model that can be built, a large data risk model, a border GPT, but it's not going to be something that just emerges, right? It's got to have a focus, and I think it needs the collaboration to make the most of that.
Perfect. I want to thank each of you for your time, and it looks like we have a little bit of time for some Q&A here towards the end. So I'm going to go back to Maggie here, and Maggie, if you've got a few questions, we've got time for that here.
Yeah, so a couple questions came through. The first one was, can you please provide some statistical data on seizures, smuggled goods, narcotics, etc., made at BCPs? How many seizures were made in the last 2 to 3 years using the software?
I assume that's mine to take. What I was describing is, as my former, being in government, having access to, operational reporting, events that were happening, systems that collect and manage all that, having the ability to provide some technology, the AI, to be able to allow people to be empowered to be able to search quickly in such a ways, not have to jump around to different, platforms, etc. That's what I was speaking to. That said, I would look on cbp.gov, or particularly, I know the Border Patrol puts out a significant amount of statistics on different events. If you look at the department's review, there's a long list of events, but as far as information available open source on all of those seizures, etc., I don't believe it'll be available, but there is some to try to look for.
Cool. Can you paint the picture of 20 years ago to today with regards to technological advancements and targeting? How far have we come? And how are AI, RPA, ChatGPT accelerating our ability to better manage our borders?
Well, I can certainly tell you about 20 years ago. I'll have to leave Michael to tell you about what's happening now. But there has been a huge acceleration, of course, in the use of technology at the borders. And, you will see as you travel increasing amounts of automated border controls all over the world now. And I have worked in a great many countries who have now developed passenger targeting systems. I think there's a bit of a challenge out there still on customs and freight targeting systems, because that depends where you go. But the old style system of having to submit a declaration every time you move goods across a border does still prevail here. It does still prevail in a lot of countries, and it's really quite a clunky way of clearing goods. And it's quite difficult for sometimes, particularly with us here. We left the European Union and the EU Customs Union, which meant that was a quadrupling of customs declaration being received by customs, which we had it caused all kinds of delays. So there is something going on now in terms of what they call supply chain intervention and getting data on custom supply chains directly through to government. There have been some trials here called the Ecosystem of Trust pilots, and the biggest problems they've identified actually haven't been technical ones, they've been legal ones, over the extent to which data can be legally shared, not just between private sector like importers and exporters and the government, but equally between government departments, because the way we built all this was very siloed in fact of what could and couldn't be shared. Now there is this huge raft of data available. So, I do think that, for me, I wouldn't be able to get into some of the chatbot and some of the things you're talking about there, Michael might. But I do think that data and what we were talking about earlier, the availability of data and the digitizing of borders is huge now. So it's a completely different picture to what we had. But I don't know what you think, Mike.
Yes, sir. So I go back to several of the mentors that I had while I was in government, and I always go back to a story that was told to me, let's call it back in the day, and it was, well, when we did targeting, what we would look for is a car would pull up, and then I'd pull the brim of my baseball cap, and there's a piece of tape on there with the license plate, and there would be a name maybe. And so you would look down and go look around. That was advanced targeting, right? That was the extent to which, some of the activities was done. So kind of puts it in context, obviously, come a long way. I really do believe, the government knows what the government knows, right? The traditional holdings, as I call it, whether it's within CBP, other government agencies, etc. There's sharing, and that is going on. And for me, it's how do we bring in at the most efficiently and cost-effective way this publicly available as well as commercially available, right? And I'm not sure. There was a recent Office of the ODNI, Director of National Intelligence, had a senior advisory group, and one of the if I could take a second, read one of what they called the single most important point in our report is this: CAI, which is their version of commercially available information, is increasingly powerful for intelligence and increasingly sensitive for individual privacy and civil liberties. So that kind of sums it up, right? Whether you're in law enforcement, intel community, etc., defense, the more in this plethora of information and how do you utilize it to combat multiple threats is going to be a challenge, given knowing that there are serious First Amendment civil rights, civil liberties. So this isn't a unique problem to customs and border organizations. Out to law enforcement, intel community. So really interested to kind of see this play out, and having lived through some of that, it's going to continue to be an interesting path.
Perfect. Maggie, anything else that came in via Q&A?
Yeah, we have one more in the Q&A. The usage of social media data such as Facebook was implied in relation to the Paris attacks. But what about CPB or UK border force usage of facial recognition and or commercially sourced cell phone locating tracking, such as Babel Locate X?
Is that a me question?
Yeah, I think so.
Come to me. So CBP utilized several commercial capabilities, utilizing the publicly available, commercially available information to assess risk. There's lots of open source information available on that subject. So I definitely would throw that out to do some research and just leave it as that.
Great. Anything else, Maggie?
Yeah, I think we have time for one more. In your experience, which countries are the most advanced in integrating advanced technology solutions into their border operations, and which are less so? And how important is international collaboration in all of this?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time actually in my career working with other countries internationally. I represented the UK at the Border 5 Group, the Five Eyes Group, the Frontex European Border Agency, you name it, IATA Corps, when you name it, I've probably had a seat there, either representing the UK or Canada. So there is a lot of collaboration that goes on government to government, a lot more than you may think about. They don't like to shout about it publicly, but there is an awful lot of very close working goes on, because my inbounds, your outbound, my imports are your exports, and largely the threats you're facing are the same as the threats I'm facing. So I think there is a good deal of work. Who's the best at it? I don't know. There's a debate going on about who might be doing it better than others. I think that a lot of that depends. You can't really compare two borders, a bit like comparing apples and oranges. Like I say, we just left the EU, made a huge change to our border because we're checking loads and loads of stuff we never had to check before when we were in the EU. And relations between countries change, between your immediate neighbours, the threat levels change. But I would say in North America, certainly I'd hats off to the CBP. I've been and seen what they've been up to. They're doing some fantastic things. Singapore is very good. There are some good operations going on in parts of Europe, in some European countries, but they're not necessarily EU-wide. They're more sort of national when they've got smaller scale. But I would say, yeah, certainly the Border 5, maybe Singapore, Australia, and some of the other countries in Europe are very good, particularly at customs targeting. So there isn't really one. I mean, if you always have guys who've got the best border in the world, and I would always go back to the three principles I said at the top of this about, well, who does push the border out best, who does integrated border management best, who's doing those things best, before I'd give you a shout who's best at it. But there is a lot of work going on, I know, across the world on all this.
Oh, good answer. One more question just came in. It's really short, so we can get it done. To what extent do you rely on human intelligence?
So I'll talk about it from what actually exists at the border for AI, and then you'll realize that everything else is currently filled in by human intelligence, right? So at the moment, all we have at the border in terms of AI really is point solutions. We have examples where an algorithm helped make one or two decisions. So an algorithm will help you decide whether the biometrics match, and an algorithm will help you decide whether the biographics match. So when you're doing a watch list check, which is absolutely an imperfect thing that's so fallible, you need an algorithm will absolutely help you make sure that you don't miss a match, and also try and minimize the number of false positives that you get. But ultimately, yeah, it's how clued up your border guard is at the time. So I'd like to see a world where the border guard, a lot of what they already do gets industrialized and is done before they reach the border. But right now, I think that a lot of what happens is down to good human intelligence, and probably the best borders in the world are the ones that have the best human intelligence there is. I've heard Tony speak about it before. I'm sure he can talk more. But it comes down to that person, looking the truck up and down, or looking the individual up and down, and using their built up knowledge and experience to make effective decisions at the border. So Tony or Michael, I don't know if you want to jump in as well on that one.
Well, I think we're nearly out of time, but I agree with that. It takes, as I said before, good officers to stop bad people, and you can't necessarily rely on some data or intelligence or something. Some of our best catches have been cold catches, actually. So I am a big believer in the way that our officers are trained on behavioural detection and such like, and I think that will continue, notwithstanding what you guys do on artificial intelligence, if I'm honest.